Every morning, I get up in our house before anyone else, hopefully, if it's been a good night. And I head down the stairs, I put on the kettle, I pour the water into my mug for my tea. And as I wait, I look at the news. It's my little ritual, do it every morning. And for 48 days straight, until Friday, I was confronted on my screen with the horrors of death from Israel and Gaza. You may have had a similar ritual. Even so, Jeremy Bowen, the BBC's editor in the Middle East, said in an interview this week, "We show too little of the brutality of death because we care too much about trying to spare people's feelings." And I think that sometimes it creeps into sanitizing the news, sanitizing death. I remember being struck by how protected we are from death when I went to Argentina on a rugby tour, and I looked in a newsagent at the front page of a local newspaper, and there was a car accident. And it was clear to me that at least one of the people in this car accident was dead. Blood everywhere. You don't get that in this country. When I was 21, I took on a summer job in a care home in Springburn, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body on the night of my first shift. I'm just not used to it. I've got Protestant heritage, and so in my existence, I had just never been confronted with the flesh of a dead body before. It's the way things are. When someone's about to die, we often take them to a hospital or a hospice to be cared for, and when they die, a curtain is pulled over, and then the family gets a few minutes to spend with the body before it's discreetly taken away to the morgue, put in a casket, and then unseen until the cremation or the burial. Notice how the language gets impersonal. The body. We try to protect ourselves from the inevitable stench of death. We instinctively know that death is not native. It has invaded, and it has an unnatural stink. Last week, at the end of chapter 10, the Jews tried to seize Jesus in Jerusalem, but he escaped their grasp. Verse 39, and then he and the disciples flee across the Jordan. It's about 150 kilometers away, but now the religious elites are desperate to have Jesus killed. In verse 16 of our passage, Thomas, who later became known as Doubting Thomas, is full of courageous faith in the face of death. He says this, "Let's all head up to Judea and die together." That's how serious it had all got. Death was approaching. It was hanging over not just Jesus, but all the disciples who followed him. Not long after they arrive east of the Jordan, news comes. A messenger is sent from their friends at Bethany, a village on the outskirts of Jerusalem. "Lazarus, the one you love, is very ill." Jesus had done life with Lazarus and his family. Think of the familiarity, almost a domestic discussion going on between Mary, Martha, and Jesus when Mary complained to Jesus that Martha is just sitting at his feet while she does all the work. They did life together. These people he knew extremely well. They knew him well. When a messenger is sent about an illness, it can't be good. Jesus would have known death is a real possibility for Lazarus. But Jesus' response could seem a bit strange. Were you struck by that? As if he doesn't think death is coming for Lazarus. He says, "The sickness will not end in death." You sure, Jesus? Want to try again? We've actually read to the end of this story. And, but awkward, but It's not how it ends. But Jesus is not saying it's not going to be fatal, terminal. He's saying it's not how Lazarus' story is going to end. It's important we face death and not pretend that it is not getting nearer for every single one of us every day. Life is short. But as we experience it, we've got to have some gospel clarity as Christians. It does not need to be the end of the story. Those of us who are Christians are in a unique position. We neither need to sanitize death as if it's not the tragic and unnatural invader that it is, or to fear the day that death is coming. As the story unfolds, we're going to see why that's true. Jesus had slipped away from these angry crowds, escapes death, and now his friend is on his deathbed. And when they finally arrive, after a 2-day delay, in Bethany, Martha is quickly out to meet Jesus, clearly distressed. Lord, where were you? It's both a statement of faith and of grief. Faith that her rabbi would have been able to do something about Lazarus' illness before it was too late. And yet, filled with grief that Lazarus hadn't been healed and was not, and was dead and placed in a tomb. I love the heart of Jesus on display through this passage. Verse 28. When Jesus and Martha finished having their conversation, Martha goes to get Mary, and he says to say to her, the teacher is here, and he's asking for you. His good friend's about to die, his life is under threat, yet he's asking for her. Isn't it beautiful? Are you suffering? Is death looming in some way in your life? Has the terminal diagnosis been given? He's asking for you by name. Maybe it's a relative of yours like Mary. He's asking for you, and he's calling your name. He wants to face it with you, to care for you, to comfort you, and to give you hope. Jesus and Mary go to find the tomb together. And interestingly, when the other mourners see that Mary is going back towards the tomb, they assume that they need to get to work, to get back to mourning. So they follow on behind her. Now, mourning here and mourning in the Middle East, even today, is very different. Like the tragic scenes of death we are seeing again and again on our TV screens from Gaza. Parents, husbands, wives, children lie on the ground holding their lifeless loved ones tightly, and they wail in horror. The tragedy of death is embraced. The same is going on here at this funeral. Even a poor Jewish family would be expected to hire at least one professional wailer and 2 flutists. Mary is weeping, as are the crowd. Seeing the impact of death, this horrible and unnatural intrusion brought into the world by sin, Jesus responds too. And he is deeply troubled. Death should deeply trouble us. It's right that we see it as unnatural, as an intruder. The Greek word here in verse 33 literally means snorting horses, and is used when people are utterly outraged from their inmost being. Jesus hates death. I imagine he was choking up and trembling when he asks, "Where have you laid him?" "Come and see, Lord." And as he approached, Jesus wept. Jesus hates death and the impact it has on people. It's not how he designed the world to be, and its horrors should not be sanitized. Verse 39, "Take away the stone." "Why, Lord? It stinks. He's been dead for 4 days. It reeks of death." But Jesus doesn't back off from the final enemy. He moves towards it. He goes face to face with its decay and nose to nose with its stench. It must be overcome. And just as the stench of death blows out from the open tomb, Jesus turns to Mary and he says, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Death is in the air. Jesus has returned to the region where these powerful elites want him arrested and killed, and he will not leave the area before he dies. And as he looks at his friend Lazarus, he does not speak words of defeat, but of victory, of glory. He hints at a supernatural reversal. John wants us to link two things Jesus says about glory so that we might see the supernatural reversal. In this passage and in the one to Mary, back in verse 4. To the passage here when he's speaking to Mary, and to the one to the disciples back in verse 4. When he said this sickness will not end in death. Then he goes on to say, no, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, you might have an objection to that, and so I just want to address it. It could seem a bit heartless. Yeah, don't worry about it. Let him suffer, so that my Father and I get all the glory. What? Are we just pawns in God's game of self-glorification? No, verse 5 quickly knocks that on the head, as if John read your mind. It says, Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Then, verse 6, there is a so. Got that he loves them, so, and therefore, because Jesus loved them, he decided to stay another 2 days. That is like mind-blowing stuff. I don't get it. I mean, what's going on? Why is he staying 2 extra days if he loves them? Why doesn't he go and heal him? In a world where we want to avoid suffering at all costs and death is hidden away, it is mind-blowing. Jesus let Lazarus suffer and die because he loved him. In verse 15, Jesus has to get really explicit with the disciples before they go that Lazarus is dead, and for their sake, he is glad that he wasn't there, that you might believe. When the time comes, he says, our friend has fallen asleep. I am going there to wake him up. Isn't that interesting? He says, it's collective, it's together. Our friend. And then it's, I am going there to wake him up. What's that about? Jesus isn't saying, please don't come, guys, because, I'd rather travel on my own this time. I kind of fancy just having all the snacks to myself, get a bit of alone time. No, he's saying, I'm the only one who can wake him. I'm the only one who can cause him to rise from the dead. He will say explicitly soon enough, but here he's deliberate about who can wake Lazarus. I am the resurrection. Now, what about that 2-day problem? What was that about? If you're eagle-eyed, you'll actually even have noticed that there wasn't really any need for it if it's just about Lazarus having to die before he gets there? The 2 days wouldn't have made a difference because he's been dead 4 days when he arrives. He would have already been dead. So what's going on here? Well, there was a mythical belief among the Jews at the time that your soul would hover over your body, waiting for an opportunity to re-enter until about 2 or 3 days afterwards when your body starts to decompose. As soon as that happens, as your face changes and as you start to decompose, as the smell comes, as we know it has done by this stage, then your soul, according to this mythical view, would have gone, departed, and there was no way of it re-entering. At that point, the magicians and the sorcerers, with their salts and herbs, couldn't help your soul to re-enter. Your soul was said to leave, and there was no way back. I think Jesus wanted the people to know for sure that this was supernatural. That there was no way that this person could have just come back by the magicians or the sorcerers or by the soul re-entering. Even though he knew that was a mythical belief, he wanted them to be totally convinced that this rising of Lazarus from the dead could only come by him, the resurrection and the life. He didn't want any confusion. This reversal of death, this horrible, unnatural event that happens to us all in a world polluted by sin that it affects, could only be done by him. He was God, the one who could come, the I am, the resurrection and life. Jesus looks in at Lazarus, at death, and he prays. He prays to his Father, asking that they may believe that you sent me. Then, in a loud voice, and I think probably a loud voice so that the hearers who'd be hearing this message around Ephesus and other towns and cities around the Greco-Roman Empire and who had Jewish heritage and would know that it would have been a noisy place, he lets them know that he speaks to everyone in the place. In a loud voice, he speaks over everyone. The mourners had to hear what he was about to say in a loud voice. Lazarus, come out. Some have said that Jesus speaks with such authority that if he hadn't used Lazarus' name, perhaps all the dead would have been raised at once. As Lazarus was helped out of his grave clothes, I imagine the mourners were in shock. They've witnessed the supernatural reversal of death. On its own, however, it's not enough. Lazarus would die again. This was a sign of something better, a better resurrection to come that would mark the beginning of everlasting life. It's not about the victory in one battle. He's giving a sign here of a victory in the whole war. And that death would be done, defeated forever. That Jesus would be able to say, it is finished. Hope of the natural life here in this moment as Lazarus is raised. That God's original design might be restored. When Jesus encounters Martha on the way to Bethany, he says something extraordinary. Your brother will rise. But because her Jewish theology was in order, her response is really quite interesting. She's like, yeah, I know. I know he's going to rise. Now, she doesn't mean he's going to rise immediately or that Jesus is going to raise him from the dead. She means that I know on the last day all will rise. She probably saw it a bit like a pleasantry that we might use today. He's in a better place, isn't he? Or, he's looking down on you now. Thanks, mate, she says. I know he'll rise again on the last day. She's right. He will rise on the last day. But as the commentator Don Carson says in his commentary, Jesus' concern here is to divert Martha's focus from an abstract belief in what takes place on the last day to a personalized belief in Him who alone can provide it. She was halfway there, but she couldn't quite see that the hope for that future resurrection was actually Jesus Himself. There is no resurrection without Him. The way to overcoming the problem of death was standing before her face to face outside her house. The Jews believed that the resurrection would happen, except for the Sadducees. That's why they were Sadducee. But that is what... I know, it's terrible. That's the Sunday school one. But you've got to include it every time you say Sadducee. It was inconceivable to most Jews that sickness, decay, and death could continue while a single person was resurrected from the dead. So in this miracle, Jesus is kind of preparing them with a paradigm shift. He's helping them to see that there can be a forerunner raised from the dead to give hope to all. What theologians now call the now and the not yet. He's been raised and we will all be raised with Him. But in this suffering world where death is still rife, we can have hope. And that is where our hope lies. A hope we will see more fully when we get to chapter 20. Jesus has taken death on by that stage, dying in our place in the most torturous, gruesome, public, and painful of ways. And the women, including Mary and Martha, head down to the tomb grieving. And they bring with them spices and balms to cover the stench of death of our Savior on the third day. But the Roman guards are gone. The tomb is empty. Weeping by the tomb, Mary is looking around, looking for someone, looking for anyone who might be able to help her. Where's my teacher gone? Where's the teacher I love gone? Where's my rabbi? A man asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." He says her name again while she weeps. In the midst of her pain, Mary. She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. It was him. Jesus was alive, resurrected to new life, and he is asking after her again. It's personal. Jesus lived and died and rose for Mary, and he lived and died and rose for you. And yet, it's cosmic. John is emphatic about what day of the week it is in John 20. Twice he mentions in that one chapter that Jesus was resurrected on the first day. Right, cool mate, I don't know why you're bothered about the date. It's a bigger fish to fry here. It's because it's the beginning. A new week. A new creation account. The first day of a new creation. This time not ex nihilo out of nothing, but ex veteri out of the old. As the Apostle Paul will describe it, he is the first fruits from among the dead, the beginning of a new harvest of many rising and living in glory forever. Romans 8 says that even the earth itself is groaning while it waits for the day that this Christ who was raised will stop the rot, stop the decay, and all illness and suffering and pain and tears and death will finally be gone. Be no more. It's interesting that John seems quite keen for us to know that Jesus was mistaken for the gardener. There was a gardener right in the beginning too, Adam. And Adam was supposed to tend and care for God's creation, for the land, and to go with Eve to fill the earth with the goodness of God. They lived in that first temple in the glory of the presence of the Lord, and they were to fill the earth with His glory. It was like a seed of glory was given that they could go with and spread all over the place in dusty, dry places and bring about fruitful environments, communities that love God, that love one another. Well, here, this new gardener, this better Adam, he would not let the side down. But instead of being disobedient and doing it his own way, was obedient to his Father all the way to the point of death. And now, in this garden moment, he's saying, it's the first day of a new creation, one that you can be wrapped up in. And until that day that he returns, we have this glorious responsibility of fulfilling a new commission to fill the earth with disciples. Go make disciples of every nation, every tribe and tongue. To go and be a blessing, to bring the glory of the Lord through these temples. For the Spirit of God reigns in you if you believe. And you have an opportunity to be Christ-like and to bring His goodness to the earth as His church. But here's what's coming. Here's why we want to do it. Here's how I want to lay our lives down and be filled with the Spirit and enjoy Jesus and know Him forever. This is why we want to tell people about the good news. Here's why we want to make sure that we're making disciples. Here's why we want to see more churches planted. Here's why we come every Sunday being a resurrection Sunday, a taste of the glory to come and the glory that has come through Christ. Because this is what Revelation 21 says it's going to be like. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." What gives us hope when we look at our screens in the morning and we see more death? Jesus. And this new creation that He is bringing to this world. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Death is not the end of our story. He is the first fruits who has risen and will not die. And one day, He will return to bring in all of life in its fullness. By His supernatural power, He has reversed the unnatural death of the curse, and the final enemy has no chance of stopping His restoration of His design of the natural. Death is not natural. And one day, it will go. Put your faith in Jesus. Trust in him, for he is the resurrection and the life.